Good evening and welcome to the Coral Springs Museum of Art featuring our Faces of War. I'm your host, Petty Eyes of an illustrator, the devastation and human connection of the Vietnam War with John Bowen, Vietnam veteran, 8-year Air Force veteran, and a lifelong artist. However, before we begin, we'd like to thank the following. Florida's Department of State, Division of Cultural Affairs, Florida Humanity Council, National Endowment for the Board of County and Visitors Bureau, City of Coral Spring, and the museum's Board of Directors, Scott Brook, Joy Carter, Joshua Simmons, Sean Sarah, and Nancy Mayer, and the museum's members. Their support to the Coral Springs Museum of Art provides the community engaging art experiences such as this evening's special presentation. We hope you enjoy this evening's opportunity to engage and ask questions at the end of this presentation. Join me tonight in welcoming tonight's guest, John Bowen.
Good evening. The name of this lecture is An Artist Goes to War. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Brittany Curtis and the Coral Springs Museum of Art for inviting me to take part in this special after the lecture that anybody might have the best that I can. My story is broken down into 3 parts. I call the first part my early years, where I give a little background on how I got through my life, my early years. The second is called service years, which includes my deployment to Vietnam in November '67 to November '68. The last is called Coming Home and the After Years. First off, I was born in the Bronx in December of 1941. My parents moved to North Jersey shortly before my 10th birthday in 1951, and I spent the rest of my years there up until December of '61 when I went into the service. 2 people that influenced my life as far as my art goes during those years was my dad first, who was and also did a lot of drawing, and so he worked with pencils and charcoal and pen and ink. And I used to sit with him and draw, and he encouraged me. And he pushed me, that I wanted to go as an artist. The second person that influenced me was my high school art teacher. And he was a watercolorist, and he got me started on it. And I've been doing it ever since, 50, 60 years later, I'm still doing watercolors. But after I graduated in '59, I was fortunate enough to get a job in an advertising agency. I started in a production capacity and eventually worked myself into what they called an artist apprentice position. And I worked for them for 2 years. And in 1961, the Selective Service Board was getting on my case, sending me letters wanting to know what I was doing. And I figured on those greetings letters pretty soon. So what I did was I went out to the different branches of service and to see if there was any kind of link towards art in any one of the services. And I found that the Air Force had what they called illustrators. So that made up my mind. That's the way I wanted to go. So in December of 1961, shortly after my 20th birthday, I enlisted in the Air Force. After my enlistment, I was sent to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. I completed an 8-week course in basic training. From there, I was permanently assigned to Bergstrom Air Force Base outside of Austin, Texas. And I was going to be working in the base graphic shop. Shortly after my arrival, I met my wife. She was from Texas, going to business college in Austin. And by the end of the year, in December, we were married. By March of 1965, we had 2 children, and I was promoted to the person in charge, the airman in charge of the base graphics shop. What we did there was we supported the whole base. It was, Bertram was a SAC base, which was Strategic Air Command. They had the bombers there and the tankers. And we supported, we were a support troop, so we, the base graphic shop supported quite an undertaking, but we had 5 illustrators there. So I did that for the remainder of my time that I was, before my time that I was shipped out to go to Vietnam. In 1966, I was promoted to staff sergeant, and in June of '67, I got my orders to go to Vietnam. I was going to be attached to the 834th Air Division headquarters unit, which was a support unit, and the division handled all the airlift operations in the country, which was quite a thing. I'll get into that a little bit later. But in that 5 months that I had we had what they called, all the support troops would get what they called light combat training, where we had to qualify with the M16, and we had films and things like that about Vietnam to try to educate us on what we were going to, which I found out later on was nowhere near what they were telling us. So, but anyway, during that period also, I was with my family. We took a 2-week leave and went to Florida to visit my folks before I was going to leave to go overseas. And while I was there, I found out that my cousin, Dean, who I grew up with in Jersey when we were kids, was in the Army and in Vietnam at the time, in the Delta region. And I remember my folks saying that he had gone over the previous February. So when I got there in November, we would still have an overlap of time before he rotated back to the States. So they thought it would be nice if I could go visit him. I thought, well, hell, I don't know where he is, and a war's going on, so I didn't really think that I would be able to. But as it turned out, I did see him over there before he went home. So with all that said, in November of the 16th, I left. I departed, and on the 19th, I got in country and started my tour. On my arrival, the first thing that happened to me, and I have to say this first, when you go over there, you go over as a replacement. I mean, most of the units were there already. So you're replacing somebody who rotated back to the States. So even though you went over there with a plane load of GIs, you didn't know anything. So here you are, you're going to a war zone, not knowing what you're in for the next year, and scary. And so what happened to amplify all that is I went to the wrong base. They had 3 ports of entry. They had one in Da Nang that was up in the north. Then they had Cameron Bay, which was central. And then they had Tan Son Nhut. And that's where I was supposed to go. But I went to Cameron Bay. So, I'm like, what the hell do I do now, And so, and get a hop, which was, I got permission to get on one of the cargo planes going from Cameron Bay to Tan Son Nhut. And I did all of that and eventually got there late in the day that I arrived in country. So I started my processing the next day. I went to personnel and I did all my paperwork. And then they told us that they I told them I was going to the 834, so they gave me a phone number. I called up, and one of the guys that worked in the order room came over and got me and drove me back to my unit. I reported in, to the commanding officer and the first sergeant. And then somebody in the office took me over to where my duty section was. I met my boss, who was captain. And then they took me to the 1200 area, which was a billeting area for support troops. And that's what I was going to be my home for the next 12 months. And the one good thing about that area was they had the main chow bowl there, which I liked. I used to count my time in the country by the meals I had left. But they were well, that too. But so I got all that squared away. Next day I went to work, and then I found out that once I got there, that there had been a separation of time between the illustrator that had been there and when I arrived. He had left in July, and I got there in November. So in between that time, they picked the whole area clean. There was nothing there but some temper paints, and and that was it. And I never used those things. Those paints were still there when I left. But I managed to work at a deal with ordering my supplies. And actually, it was kind of tough because art supplies was not a high priority item, in Vietnam. So, and the stuff they sent was, not a good quality. So what I did was I wrote to my wife and I said, send me some stuff. I told her what I needed, and she did. So I got that, and then after a while, I was able to work out a decent schedule for supplies. But there's a funny story that goes with that. One time when I was really down on supplies, I went over to the supply warehouse. They had a little area in the front of the warehouse. They called it the country store. And anybody who was working in the different support units, they would have a representative there. Would go down there, and you would get a card. And it was almost like a credit card. You had to have that to get into this place. And they had stuff out on display. And if they had what you needed, you would get it. But a lot of times they didn't have it. So then this one particular time, I was really in need of certain items, and they told me, no, we don't have that. So I was so desperate, I just kind of hung around. And while they were not looking, I went into the warehouse. And I went around, and finally I found what I needed, and I stole it.
What was this thing?
Yeah, I stuck it down my shirt in my pocket, and slipped out a side door, and got away. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. I'm stealing stuff so I can do my job. But whatever happened, you just said, oh well, that's Vietnam, and it's that spirit. I realized this after I was there. You can adapt to anything. I mean, we didn't have it as bad as the troops, in the field, but it certainly wasn't experience. What you were going through. You still had to deal with the climate. The weather was the worst I'd ever seen. The heat, it was just amazing. Anytime you pull the detail on the outside, you always wound up either getting sick to your stomach or passing out. And they had salt tablets everywhere. But still, it affected you. So and to this day, I mean, my heroes are the Vietnam vets who spent their time out in the jungle and stuff like that. I mean, I was there, and we went through some stuff in '68, which was a bad year, but nothing like what they went through. But we did what we had to do, and we moved on. We did our job, and so another thing that we experienced when we got over there was being support troops. We were not issued any weapons, and So we just, accepted that too. They told us, you're in the secure area. Don't worry about it. If you had to go somewhere off base, you would go to the orderly room and get your combat gear. Your weapon, your helmet, your black vest, and that stuff. And then you would go do whatever you had to do, and you come back, and when you came back, you turned it back in. And the other exception was they had a 900-man air police squadron on the base to handle all the security. And a lot of times they didn't have enough men, so they would get volunteers from the support troops to help them. And that was an all-day detail. It started before it got light. You would go to the orderly room at 4 in the morning and check out your gear again, and then go over there, report to them, and they would have you do different details. I guarded the front gate. I guarded other gates around the base. I was in highly secure areas where they needed extra guys, and I also went out on what they called convoy guard, where we would be driven out by bus to a certain place, and we would get on these trucks, pickup trucks. One time they were loaded with sandbags on all the buildings for protection. Anyway, I did that a couple of times, and that was scary because you're out there pretty much by yourself, and you're in the truck with a couple of Vietnamese guys who you don't know, and you're driving along the country road 20 miles from the base, and it's you and them, and you're wondering, what the hell am I doing here? Is this for real? In December, my cousin Dean came up to see me. He found out through my mother, who told his mother, and then she told him. So he found out the unit I was in, the base I was on. And he drove up with some of the guys in his unit on what they call the mail run, M-A-I-L, mail run. And they dropped him off where I was working. And we got to spend about 20 minutes together. And he invited me to come down to see him. And, I thought, they're not gonna let me go. But I talked to the captain and he said, yeah. He said, sure, go. So we had worked out to where I was gonna leave on a Saturday morning. We had a heliport right up the street from where the 1200 area was. And I was gonna get a chopper out down to the Delta. And then I would sleep overnight and come back on Sunday. Well, that Friday before I left, he called me. And he said, don't come down. And I said, why not? And he said, well, I'm not there anymore. And I said, well, where are you? And he said, oh, I'm in the 3rd Field Hospital. Mm-hmm. He had gotten moved. But he said, I'm all right. He said, but I'd like for you to come and see me. And the 3rd Field Hospital wasn't far from where I was. So I told him I'd be down that night. And he says, I want you to do something for me. I said, what? And he said, well, I'll tell you when you come down. And when I got there that night, he told me what had happened. He was a radio operator in the recon platoon. And they were out on patrol, and the first guy tripped a booby trap. And wounded the first 6 guys, and he was the 6th guy in line. He had gotten wounded in both legs and his arm, and one piece of shrapnel in his helmet that obviously saved his life. But he was okay, he was out of danger. But what he wanted me to do was to write to his mother and tell her that he was all right, because and saying I'm wounded, but that's a all to tell her. So I did. The next day I sent out a letter to her and told her that I had seen him and that he was all right. And then about 2 weeks later, she sent me a letter back thanking me. And she sent me $2 and said, get a beer on me. So, which I did. But, so, he was in the hospital. And then he was going to be returned to his unit because they told him that his wound was not enough to be rotated back to the States. So he had about a month to go. And the plan for that night was when he got out, which was on the 30th of January, he was going to spend the night and then get a chopper out in the morning to go back to his unit. Well, the Tet Offensive started that morning. And that was, Tet was a big holiday. It was the New Year's. Arranged for a truce, but there would be no fighting. And the enemy took advantage of it. And on the morning of the 31st, attacked all up and down the whole country. All the major Tansanut and also Saigon. And we woke up that morning at 3 in the morning, two guys riding in jeeps through our area yelling, wake up, the base is under attack. So, the first thing you think of is like, what the hell am I doing here? Is this for real? But it was. And we found out later that they attacked the other side of the base near the flight line. And there was a big battle going on over there, and eventually over the course of the day, they were beaten off with a lot of casualties on both sides. And but they didn't attack our side of the base. But we were close to Saigon, and we heard the fighting going on in there, and that continued for about 2 weeks. After about 2 or 3 days, they finally came in. Some of the officers in our unit came in and gave us a briefing on what was going on. Prior to that, we had no idea what was happening, and we were confined to the area where we were, and just hanging out, waiting to see what happened. And finally, after 2 weeks, it all settled down, and things were starting to get back to normal again. And the supplies were coming back in again, and we were actually going back to work and everything. And I remember the night of the 18th of February. The reason it stays in my mind is 2 reasons. One was because it was my 3rd anniversary of being in country. It was my 3rd month. So I kind of laughed to myself about it. 3 months in, done, and 9 to go. But again, I was woken up in the middle of the night, around 3:30 in the morning, by my best friend over there, a fellow by the name of Joe, waking me up, saying, "Get up! You're being shelled." And we had our first rocket attack. And so I quick jumped in, got my pants on, jumped in my boots, and we were ready to go to the bunker in the at the opposite end of the building. And I ran over to these guys, like, what the hell are you doing? Let's get going. And I looked out from the base. I saw the rockets falling and everything. And there was like 5 of us standing there. And we stood there by the doorway watching the whole thing going on. And like we were mesmerized to see the whole thing. It was we never experienced anything like that. We saw rockets falling and exploding and fires, and the whole night sky was lit up. There was like several hundred rockets dropped on us that night. And from then on, for like 2.5 months, we would get rocket attacks every other night. And after a while, we learned to live with it. I mean, a lot of them were just harassment. They might drop in 10 or 12. And they had a big area on the base to drop these things on. But we would hear from time to time, like one of them hitting one of the building barracks and killing a number of troops, and wounding some, or damaging planes on the base and things like that. And we just, I actually slept through a couple they weren't close, but you just kind of got used to it. But the one thing we learned afterwards, or I did, was that stuff didn't go away after it went away. It stayed in your mind. And things would set it off. You know, you heard a sudden loud noise or something, you automatically would dive in for cover or some other thing like that, or yell and hit it, you know, in the middle of a room where there's a bunch of civilians who didn't know what the hell you were talking. But you just, during that period of time, we were also issued weapons, finally, after the Tet Offensive. And I was issued an M16. A lot of the NCOs were getting weapons, not everybody. But I got an M16 and one magazine and 20 rounds of ammunition. And firefight, those 20 rounds would be gone in 5 seconds. So I was thinking to myself, I need to get more ammunition. So I talked to some guys, and they told me that if I went over to the NCO club on base, and if I had something to trade, I could get what I wanted. So I did. I went over there, and I wound up getting 200 rounds of ammunition and 10 clips. And I took all of those, and I put them in my wall locker for safekeeping. I locked them up, and I know other guys were doing that also. And we had an incident later on that where we had to load all that stuff up and go out in preparation of there was an attack going on in the 1200 area down the street from us, and they told us we'll call you if we need you. So we're standing there waiting, you know, to be called into action or something, and we had all our clips filled and we were waiting to go. But what happened was they called in air support, close air support. And for this plane, it was an A-1E World War II vintage fighter that they called in, and it flew right over our barracks, rooftop level. And as he passed us, the canopy was back, and the guy looked down at us as he flew over. And at that point, everything went to slow motion. I'm looking up at the guy, and I could see his face, and I swore that our eyes. Instant. I heard the loudest noise I had ever heard of a bomb down the street from us. As it turned out, it was a 500-pounder, and he broke up the attack. And first I heard the boom, and then I saw this black mushroom cloud going up in the sky, and then shrapnel started dropping around us. That's how close it was, and close air support. Hot metal was dropping around us. After that, we turned in our weapons. I took my ammunition back to my wall locker, and I walked off to work, thinking to myself, "Oh well, another day in Vietnam." So, but at this point, I started to do a special project for the Air Force, where I was doing drawings, where I was graphically documenting all the airlift operations for the Allies in Vietnam. The pilots and crews doing their delivery of you know, the loading and unloading of supplies, the dropping off, the different techniques they had for dropping off the supplies and stuff like that. And it didn't take me no time to find out that these guys were special, that their devotion to duty. I mean, they were there doing their job day in and day out. And it was a very dangerous thing. I mean, the division lost a lot of planes while I was there, and pilots and crews were killed and wounded. And I just felt a kinship to these guys because I was out there, not flying on their missions with them, but capturing what they were doing, and you know, graphically, and telling their story. And in that year, received 2 presidential unit citations, which was, quite a thing. And I felt proud to be just even a part of that. And so, I was do rough pencil sketches, and also I worked with technical fountain pens that I was introduced to over there in Vietnam. They were called rapidograph pens. I don't know if anybody knows what they are. I don't know if they have them today. But anyway, I worked with them extensively while I was over there. And when I would get back to the duty section, I would do more finished drawings and paintings. I started doing paintings in watercolor. And I used all of that stuff as reference for the division, for the headquarters unit, so that they could make presentations and briefings to my visiting dignitaries, how and so I did all of that stuff with them, made lots of slides and stuff. And this carried through from May until the beginning of October. And then one day in early October, when I was out drawing on the flight line, some guys came in. I don't even know the whole story about this, but apparently they were from the Air Force Academy. And they took all my work. And apparently they had permission because, commanding officer didn't stop them and my boss didn't stop them. And when I got there, all my work was gone. And I was pretty upset about it all in the beginning. But they, then I realized that, this stuff really wasn't mine. And then it hit me that, if they want that for the Air Force Academy, that was fine with me. I felt good about it after a while, thinking about it. And they said that what they were going to use it for was the training aids for the cadets. And for like 40 years, I never really thought much about it. And then one day I called over there to see if I might be able to track it down. And I couldn't. So I never saw the stuff again. And I never took anything home with me that I had done over there. I didn't want to at that time. I never dreamed that I would be doing a book, 25 years old. And then come October, I was what they call getting short. And that meant that I had maybe a month left to go in country. So at that time, or I should say that when you're there, everybody thinks about going home, of course. And you can ask anybody, any day, how many days you have left in country, and they could tell you. And so, I was married and had 2 kids before I went over, so, I was very much into thinking about my family and stuff like that. But when I started getting to the point where I knew that I was going to be coming home soon, my whole attitude changed. It was like all of a sudden I started getting worried about going home. I started asking myself, does my wife still love me? Do my kids know me? Will they know me? Because they were little when I left. How will my friends feel about me? Because we started hearing about the protests back home about the war. And we also started hearing about the guys coming home and how they were getting treated. So this all added to our apprehension, actually, about going back to the world, as they said. And so, you're thinking about all of that stuff. And the next thing you know, the next thing I knew, I was getting ready to go home. We got rocket. And the next day I was back in the States. So it's like, you're physically there, but you're not mentally there. I was still a non. And it took a long time for that physical part, the mental part, to catch up to the physical part. And that just added to all of the, the mixed feelings that I had about going home. I was totally disappointed when I got there because I wasn't a happy camper. I was confused about everything. and I couldn't talk to anybody about it because they didn't understand. You know, I had a year left to serve when I left Vietnam in my second enlistment. And so I got a 30-day leave. And when we came into the States at Travis Air Force Base, we went through customs, and then they directed us, the guys that were going home on leave, to the shuttle buses to the airport, San Francisco International Airport. And the one thing that I'm still mad about to this day, that I have issues with, is they never told us what to expect. They didn't know anything about PTSD. That term hadn't been come up with yet, not until the 70s, I think, and or Agent Orange or any of that stuff. And so they didn't tell us anything. And so when I go home and I'm starting to experience all of this stuff, this apprehension and nervousness and all this other stuff, and being mad all the time. I was mad when I saw kids dancing on television, eating their food in a restaurant. Huh? And when they talked about my dad, and I didn't understand why. And I was walking around trying to calm down all the time. And I felt, after about 2 weeks, I felt like I wasn't fitting in, you know? And I was very disappointed about the whole thing. You know, it was nice to see my kids and my wife and all that stuff, but I still felt uncomfortable. Even to the point where I thought I might feel better if I was back in Vietnam. And you know, and that made me crazy thinking about that, you know? But that's the way it was. And then all of a sudden, after about 2 weeks, I started dreaming about rocket attacks again, you know, and even I experienced some flashbacks, which is really scary because it's in the middle of the day, you're wide awake, and all of a sudden you see the scene in front of you changing, and you're backing up, and it's so real that you can feel the heat on you and everything else. So I didn't know how to deal with it, and I couldn't talk to anybody. They didn't understand, or they were indifferent about it, or they were hostile. So I just shut up. And for 25 years. My family told me after that time, you know, that they didn't know anything about that part of my life. And I was actually shocked, because I didn't realize that how quiet I had become about it all. And eventually, after talking to my daughter about it, because she was 2 years old during my deployment, and you know, when she came to me and said, "You were in the Army, right, Dad?" And I said, "No, I was in the Air Force." She didn't even know what branch of service I was in. And I said, "Well, I'm going to write a short." And when I started writing it in 1993, I started writing the book. I realized that it was going to have to be a book. Short story wasn't going to do it. And it took me 20 years to write the book. This is the book right here. 11 months and 19 days. That's how long I was in country. It took me 20 years to write it. I was smart enough to get a professional editor to help me. And I wrote the first draft, and I got her to critique it. And she gave me pointers on it, and I wrote a second draft, and she critiqued that. And I wrote a third draft, and she said, "Okay, you're ready. It's as good as it's going to get," she said. So I went to a seminar about self-publishing, and it was given by a publishing company called Middle River Press, who are in Oakland Park. And I was so impressed with them that I signed a contract. And they did the production work for me on my book. And the book came out I finished it in February of 2013. And in August of 2013, the book was published. And I immediately started doing author events and veteran events. And the following always um, put my book in for a competition with the Florida Authors and Publishers Association. And they awarded my book a silver medal, which was pretty exciting to me. I wouldn't have never done it myself. I didn't know anything about that, but they did. And they were, they thought it was good enough in the memoir category to present the medal. But I go back a little bit. When I got out of the service, I worked for, in '69, I worked for the Miami Herald for 17 years. And also 17 years for the Fort Lauderdale Sun Sentinel. In my life, as far as therapy for me, I thought, because it always kept me like focused and like able to get rid of, put everything in perspective. And because for all those years, I didn't even join the VA until like 5 years ago. And the only reason I did was because one of the talks that I came to me and talked to me about it, bought my book, and suggested that I go to the VA with him. And he walked me through the thing, and I got signed up. And they eventually got me okayed for a PTSD, and I started going to counseling. And I found out that years or more, 40, before I joined the VA, was the things that I was supposed to do. I learned on my own how to handle this stuff. The only thing I wasn't doing was talking about it, and not really understanding why I was going through all this stuff. But over these past 4 years, I've been doing a lot of counseling, and I realize, what it is, and I'm grateful for being able to have that help, and eventually starting to talk to people about it, other veterans, counselors and stuff like that. And so what I did, I started doing a lot of outdoor shows. Here again, my art was, in the forefront of keeping me focused on my life and stuff like that. Not that my family didn't help me, they did. But I would have to say that my art was the main thing in my life that was consistent. But my art was always there for me. And when I did the outdoor shows, I brought my book with me. And when I did the veteran events, I met hundreds, if not thousands, of really great military families and veterans and civilians who were actually interested. And I was able to talk to them and get them to the point where they would appreciate what the military was doing, even to today. I consider that more or less like a mission in my life. And so that's what I did at that point and up to this period now. And my art was my main focus and my therapy in my life. Thank you. And now I think it's supposed to be a question and answer period.
Yeah, John, thank you so much. Thank you for coming out today.
Do we have any time for that?
We do have time for that, most definitely. We would love to have people, if there are questions in the audience, would be more than happy to take those questions.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
This painting over here is the original painting I did for the cover for the book. But that's the original stuff that I did for the book. Because as I said earlier, I didn't bring anything home with me. And when I decided to write the book, I came up with all this art. And I tried to keep it in the same style and vein that I was working in when I worked over there. So the drawings are a little bit crude, but that's the way they work.
I have two questions first, personally. My first question is, how old were you?
I was 26.
Wow.
I was an old guy.
Right, yeah. And then my other question was, what did you trade for all that ammunition? You never said.
So it's not mysterious or whatever you want to call it. I had extra sets of rapidograph pens,
Okay.
and I was able to interest somebody, not the guy that I was dealing with directly. I can't tell you exactly how many I incomplete sets. And I went through two of them when I was there, and I brought one home with me.
Two questions. So, one, did you ever get approached by any of the military men to maybe do a portrait for them to
Oh,
send
yeah.
back to their families?
Yeah, I did a few of those. I was never really good at portraits, but I did some. And I also did some paintings, what you call commission. I did two for this one pilot who wanted specific areas on the base. You know, the cargo hold yard and I can't think of the name. It was one of the buildings there, and I did two paintings. All of them were very, were kind of lucid in the way I work now. But he was happy, and I was doing them for like $25 or something like that.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty good back in the, 68. But the other question is, maybe your grandchildren to know what you went through. But do you find that also the book helped the therapy process?
Yes.
Of
Yeah.
being able
Well, when I
to,
first started, it was hard because I hadn't done anything. And pretty much kept quiet about everything. And then all of a sudden I'm writing about it. So it was difficult. I mean, there were certain parts of me where I would have to get up and walk around and get over it and then get back. There was a lot that I didn't talk about, the experiences that I had over there, because, I mean, we only had 40 minutes. I did one presentation one time and talked for about 2 hours and explained a number of other things that happened. 1968 was a very rough year all over the country, but particularly in the Saigon and Consonute area. I mean, guys here who are, Army guys who were in the field, came. Starting with the Tet Offensive and the Second Offensive and the rocket attacks and the details I was on and the friendly fire incidents that I witnessed and different things like that. I just didn't have enough time to talk about.
and when did you work for Miami Girl? Like,
January 1970 until May 1987. And then I worked for myself for 5 years, which turned out to be not too good of an idea. Started out good. But then all of the computers started to come in and everything like that at that point. And I had to make a decision on whether I was going to take time off to learn that, buy the computer and the software and learn it, or get a job. And I got a job luckily with the Sun Sentinel. And then I worked for them for like 17 years. And then they gave me a buyout, when the newspapers were on the way out. And they were cutting way back. And I was in retirement age at that time. So I took the buyout and just started doing. Jane, you have a question?
I was just gonna say, all these years I've known you, I really know you now.
Yeah.
The stuff you said today, you never told me before.
I still find it hard to talk about it. When I talk about it to somebody, I just find that I'm doing that and thinking consciously about apologizing. I just feel like I'm taking somebody's time away, or I'm telling them something they really don't want to hear, and I apologize about it. And they're usually nice about it, and then they'll say, "No, it's okay, don't worry about it." I don't talk about it all the time. My different friends of mine have told me that, if you were talking about it, all the time, that'll remind me about something. And then, I was like, hey, I did this, or, something like that. Not keep it kind of short and everything. And no matter what it is or how short, and I told the council about that. And they said, I think it's small. Maybe it's, anybody else?
I wanted to say something else.
All right.
After the lecture today, I think something to
My
say.
agent.
Yeah,
Don't worry, no
I was
pressure.
gonna
Don't worry.
I actually was gonna ask if you had,
I do have extra books.
Okay.
But I don't know if I can sell them. I can't sell them here, right?
I think we'll talk about it in a little bit, yeah, for sure. Are there any other questions this evening for John?
You guys back there, everybody?
I have a comment.
Okay.
It's not a Vietnam veteran for years. And I guess the one thing they all bring up is the heat.
Ah.
They
I think I mentioned that.
It wasn't hot, it was damn hot.
Yeah.
Can you feel
Yeah, I mean, we pull details outside. We did our regular work, but we were always, being support troops, we always were doing extra stuff. And we had to do it, and we'd do that, and we'd also do what we had to do, our regular job. So we were busy, which was good. I didn't mind that. But being outside and working, like we would build bunkers sometimes with plywood and sandbags. And, oh God, I mean, you could have taken a shower and 5 minutes later you were like wringing wet, you could wring your clothes out. And you would get like sick to your stomach and sometimes you'd even pass out. I did that. Just passed out, fell right on the ground, and they just would work around.
The reason in Florida.
Is it hotter
In the
there?
rain season, which was like it started in, like, towards the end of April, it went through October. By the time you got to September, it was raining all the time, every day, all the time, day and night. And I mean, in between all of that stuff too. I mean, everything was flooded, and humidity was fantastic, and the rats came out, and we were constantly battling the rats. And you had to make sure, if you got bit, you had to make sure that you got that. And if you had rabies, then you had to get those shots. And if you didn't get them, you got those shots, just to be sure, So, and I've seen them as big as, like this big, crawling around at night. So, scary. I thought it was a cat. Huh?
Did you have bugs too?
Oh, yeah. But then, they weren't as bad as.
Sounds good as the rest.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were out during the day, were you ever aware when you were going to be attacked?
But when anything did happen, it came out of the blue. So you always was trying to be prepared for it.
Did you always walk around with arms to protect yourself?
Not on the base.
No.
No, even when we were issued our weapon, they were kept in what they call the connets behind their barracks. And the only time we needed it, we got them, was when something happened, like the attack in our area, in the 1200 area. We were just, told to get our weapons and stand by. That was pretty scary. Stand by to hear the firing going on at the street and the bullets going crazy. But moments, but mostly it was, during the rocket attacks and things like that. I can remember laying under my bunk at night and listening to them walk the rockets into our area. And there's nothing you can do about it. Hoping they don't hit you.
I had a question. Just curious, because I have seen certain other stories of other Vietnam vets and their experiences. One thing I wanted to know is, did you ever, after we came back and you know, over all this time, have you met anyone from the other side, like, you know, any Vietnam soldier or, you know, no?
I did meet my best friend 42 years later. We had lost contact. We had promised to stay in touch, but we didn't. And the counsel, I asked the counsel about that one time, and he said it's normal. It's like in most cases that, you know, the veteran just wants to get on with his life, so he forgets about everything else. And what had happened was, this guy that I mentioned, Joe Warren, for like 42 years, we didn't. And he said that he had just recently retired, and he moved to a place called the Villages. He wanted to see them. In the local newspaper, about two veterans after 42 years meeting each other, you know, and renewing their friendship. And we're still in contact with each other, but he had, after living there for a couple of years, he moved up to North Carolina. So when he was in Florida, I would go up to see him on occasion there. But we still stay in contact with occasional call or an email. But nobody else, I haven't met anybody else in my group. Yeah.
Did you, when you met him, did he himself also had a hard time in keeping it in and not having an outlet?
Yeah, basically, pretty much, you know, what I said. And the thing was, I was writing a book at that time. So I would go up there and we would go over it. And he would tell me things, you know. Or if it didn't get quite right, and, you know, and we'd sit there and discuss the stuff for a while. And the first interview I did, after the book was out, I did with the local radio station up there in Ocala, which was close to where he was. And the both of us went, and they interviewed both of us. Well, they didn't know that I wrote the book, but they talked to both of us. And then they, at the same time, they videotaped it. And they put it on YouTube, and they sent me the link. So I did that, and I downloaded it on Facebook. And I sold a lot of books that way. People actually, you know, listen to the interview. Maybe not all the way to the end, but they, enough of them did to where I sold a number of books over the next few months. Anybody else? That it?
John, I really wanted to thank you
for having me.
It's been a really insightful and engaging experience listening to your story. Your stories are so detailed, it really paints a colorful picture for all of us, and also our viewers on Facebook and YouTube Live, what your experiences were like while in the Vietnam War. I hope that we'll see you again soon, hopefully, yes?
Yes.
And again, how about a round of applause for We want to thank all of our audience this evening for coming into the Coral Springs Museum of Art. In addition to, we'd love to thank also our viewers on Facebook and YouTube Live. If you like what you saw this evening, we ask that you follow, subscribe, and like what you saw. In addition, Art Explaining is coming back on November 19th. Conversation with our Makers Market artisans, where we speak to Crystal Bacchus, Diane Lublinsky, in addition to Ashley Look. And they tell us a little bit about what they do with watercolor, ceramic sculpture, in addition to wooden spoon carving, which I'm really excited to hear about too. So we hope that you'll join us then. And as well.